always feel like I'm introducing, like I'm like a pilot on an airline where I'm like, hello and welcome to, the flight to sword place land. Anyway, I'm Tim, regular instructory type person at the Old Sword Club. Normally in person, which we're doing again, actually. We're meeting up this Saturday in Haverfield. And tonight I'm joined by Jacob.
Hi.
Say them very funny places. And yeah, we're going to look at the typical 19th century British military sabre, or what was typical of British military sabre after about 1860-ish. I wrote a big history in the event and video description of this that I've now completely forgotten, but I've gone live because yay, nerves. Cool. So yeah, kind of why I wanted to do this is I wanted to talk about the sword system of William Tuohy, who was a sergeant and fencing master in 19th century Britain, who basically created a series of drills that were in use in the British military with some degree of modification. As recently as the 1930s is actually I've seen a video of one of his drills, although it's obviously not what's exactly in the manual. It's obviously changed a little bit over time, but you do still see it. You see it occasionally in civilian manuals, but not often. And the points where you tend to see it a point like in the lead up to say World War One, like sort of a couple of years before, where it's more someone is basically going, here's what I learned in the military. Probably the most prominent example of that is, I've completely forgotten the manual. Major Elliot, whose manual Matt Easton republished, discusses all of the fighting skill or hand-to-hand combat skills he learnt as a soldier or when he was training, so boxing, foil, bayonet, and also sabre /cutlass, and he describes it. The other place it's described, interesting enough, is in R.G. Allanson-Winn's manual, Broadsword and Single Stick, where he lists it as, hey, this is what the military does, but he also says he doesn't think it's very good. He thinks that basically it's only really going to teach you useful things if there's a proper fencing instructor there to correct all the mistakes that you're likely going to make if you just do the drills. But yeah, he's one of the people who I listed who actually doesn't like this system, but includes it because he's a sword nerd. Obviously, the most famous critic of Toohey's work is Alfred Hutton, who basically was inspired to write Cold Steel, and a lot of his fencing work was inspired by the fact that he didn't think that Toohey was very good, or like Toohey's method was very good. He never mentions Toohey by name. I suspect it might be he thinks Toohey as a person was better, or he just didn't know him. But either way, Hutton doesn't like this system. But what I find really interesting about it is most humorists don't know anything about it. And one of my favorite weirdnesses about modern humor is that a lot of people refer to doing like Hutton or Wade or something as doing British military sabre, but the systems they're doing are civilian systems. Hutton was only ever taught in military in specific regiments he was a part of, whereas most of the audience for his fencing manuals were civilians, and most of where his stuff was practiced was in civilian fencing cells. Same with Wade, who, yes, he was a veteran, but he rose to prominence as a swordsman well after he left the military. And so there's all of these people doing British military sabre who aren't actually doing the military system at the time. They're doing civilian systems for still what was a military weapon. So now let's have a look at what Toohey's system actually is. So we're just going to use cutlasses. But to start off with, the first drill starts with the cutlass behind the back, work behind the back. We start in, I'll move back so you can see our feet. Start with our feet in L like this, in what is called first position, which is also the position after, and this is a position you basically move to after a series of marching drills. And then from here, the first drill is you move to what is called second position, which is a fencing stance, basic stance, and then third position, which is a lunge. And then back to second position, and also bounce back to first position. And there are variants of this drill really through most British military systems of the period, where they get you to move through those positions kind of randomly. It's not, well, it would be random from the perspective of the trainee, the person yelling at you, first position, second position, third position, first position. It is doing it in order, but the idea is you're basically learning footwork, and you learn it in isolation from the rest of the system. And this is actually something you see in more and more 19th century manuals, where they teach things kind of in isolation and expect you to put them together yourself, which is, and I actually quite like this approach, to be honest. I think it actually helps develop critical thinking within the fencer. The next drill is you come to guard. So in second position, you form the engaging guard. The hand is in line with the sword side shoulder. Depending on the length of the sword, either the tip or the point of percussion is in line with the offside hip. The sword is basically put in front of you. And as much as the core drills of this are all solo drills, there are partner drills in some manuals, but not others. It's still important that you actually come on guard with this properly, which, thanks Jacob, is at this very, very close distance. Like, we are probably closer to each other than we would normally start. I don't know, where would you know if you were going to fence me? Yeah, like, would be much further.
Where a good step in, at least.
Yeah, if not more. To the extent where if I'm on guard at distance, if I take my sword away, you'd probably just be just out of distance.
Yeah, just a small beam.
Yeah. So it's a very, very close range system, which, given that it started as a naval system, kind of makes sense. But I think also just as a system for using a close quarter weapon, it kind of makes sense that in the age of breech loading firearms, you'd expect to be using melee weapons at very, very close range. Like you wouldn't expect necessarily to be running up to people to stab them. You'd expect that you would have the weapon out because you're indoors or because people are on top of you.
It's almost surprising you don't see more grappling in the sabre version, particularly because both your tips are down as well.
Yeah.
This distance is close, but if you tip up, that's hard to, you don't want to reach out. But if you both tip down,
yeah, you just bang.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only grappling in any of the manuals that depict this system is in the advice about what to do. So in the advice about how to deal with a bayonet, they say, grab the, parry and grab the bayonet. They don't tell you how to grab, they just tell you to do it.
However you can.
Yeah. That's kind of thing. So from here, once you've learned to form the guard, you move into, or you do what is essentially the next drill. My face forward so that it's easier to see, which is the cutting drill. The cutting drill is you start by moving to a shoulder position, throw what is known as cut number 1, come up to the next shoulder position, throw cut number 2, back to the first shoulder position, cut 3, next shoulder position, cut 4, and back to guard. So let's just do that again, like fluently, because it's meant to be done it's meant to be done smoothly and togetherly. So go 1, 2, 3, 4, and back to guard. I think we both instinctively wanted to go.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Wow.
But there are no rising cuts. This system has exactly 4 cuts and exactly 4 parries. The next guard in the system, drill in the system.
Interesting to think about is how how unnatural the movement from here to your first cut is.
Yeah.
Just because you bring it over your head, like you would have thought, cut 1.
Yeah, or even cutting from the opposite side because that's more intuitive.
Yeah.
But no. Yeah, it's a weird one. Interesting enough, one of the ways they would actually test this is they get people to use a cutlass to chop a lead bar. So there's a bit of test cutting as well, which I find interesting that they were using hung lead bars that were between 1.5 and 3 inches thick, depending on how much power the person could generate the cut or how much you want to test them. But yeah, it's a very kind of vicious, choppy system.
It's just interesting because you think of, like in Hutton, cut 1 and 2, and parries these two parries are probably 80% of what you're going to be doing.
Mm.
So you kind of think of maybe the first order things and what you're going to put first in the system, which kind of makes me think you're not actually parrying here so much as coming to tiers. Tiers and then one makes sense.
Yeah. I think there is also an assumption in the system that if you attack, your opponent will parry before riposting. Which, I mean, actually, let's break into evaluating now. I was going to go through the whole system, but where we've gone for if we're on guard like this, if I pull back my hand, you've got to, if you just flick your wrist, you've got a very quick opening, or even with like like if I pull back my hand, I'm giving you an opening at a very close range. Like, to make this kind of cut work, I need to start really far back where, you can't countercut me until I've got my tip out.
Yeah.
But that's not where it starts. It starts here, where, I'm very vulnerable to that. So my suspicion is a lot of this is actually part of the way in which sparring rules are impacting fencing, because as far back as the 1845 infantry sword exercise, which is still using the old Angelo the Younger system, you've got you've got rules where if we double, the winner is the person who was on the lunge. So you lunge if two people attack, it's the winner. Whoever's on the lunge wins unless they've cut a second time without coming back to guard, in which case they lose. And in situations where both go on the lunge, it's a tie. Which means that in sparring, if we're here and I pull back, get countercut, and still hit and just plow through and hit you because these aren't actual swords, I win the point. And so very, very quickly, people basically learn I have to parry, which means that a person can do all sorts of weird shit to get their hand moving without risk, in a way that you can't actually do, or in a more free system without protection rules, you can't actually do.
So I wonder if in practice it was actually done at further range, especially since the first drill is essentially lunge and slip. That would suggest to me that if you were doing anything at me, I'd be stepping out of way or reaching into you.
Well, here's the thing. If you slip as I attack, you're still in distance of me on a full lunge.
Yeah, that's true.
So I can still come in, and it's a very short lunge. And we actually do know that they drilled sparring starting engagement because there are descriptions in at the very least the 1875 infantry sword exercise that says to fence with single sticks, you start an engagement and then you just tell everyone have at it. I think the command is begin, I think. But you basically tell people to fence and they just do a linear fencing match in a very small space in ranks with single sticks. So they're starting, they're sparring at very close range as well. So yeah, it is kind of interesting, the cuts. I also find it interesting that's not a criticism of the system. Like no one's like, hey, these cuts are a bit bollocks. Also true. Allanson-Winn thinks that the drills don't teach you to cut properly unless you have a fencing master to move your hand to the correct position. He thinks they'll teach you to cut way too wide, which is something that is vulnerable to a countercut. But there might also be a timing aspect where the fencing instructors really drill in how to not be countercut or how to change the technique as written to avoid countercuts. Because there is, in the 1930s, a variant of this drill where they don't come all the way back as depicted in Major Elliott's work. They come to about halfway, which would be still possible to countercut if you're really, really quick.
Especially on the straight line.
Yeah. But
force.
Yeah, not with a lot of force and you basically, unless you had very good reflexes and really lined it up, wouldn't work. So I suspect that there was ways of getting around problems with the drills as written in the period. But yeah, doing this is, I tried a bunch of this last Saturday and it did not work very well. Yeah. So my actually one, since we've launched into criticism, we're going to have ourselves. One of the criticism Hutton makes of the guard is if you come guard, because if I engage in 6, you're pretty much screwed. Because any attack you make, like any attack you throw, is going to get caught on my sword. Like I've basically got control. So from here, all you can really do is defend. And I think the same is true from medium guard as well.
Yeah.
If we come to here.
My first instinct is before I do any kind of attack, I need to get you
Moving, which leaves you vulnerable to an attack.
Mm.
And I can, from here, I can launch at you pretty easily. Whereas if you launch at me, you either need to
come
retract.
around your sword somehow.
Yeah, which means I've got a fair degree of control.
Mm.
That's a thing that, I mean, it's a thing Hutton comments on. It's a thing I noticed about it. I don't tend to use this guard as much as that launch.
I do wonder, since the movement from here to cut 1 is so awkward, if that's meant to be kind of a beat.
Like an expulsion. Yes, very possibly.
Because especially if they are teaching to begin your cuts from back here, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, beat out of the way. Yeah, beat advancement. Very possibly. In fact, and that also makes sense from the perspective of a parry. Like if you parry sort of a high prime and then go to really any of those conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An element of flick to it. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of flick to it. You can get a very effective beat. Which just very possibly a possible application. The problem is that they don't tell us what the application of any of this is. They just tell us what the drills are, and all of the manuals that we have are basically manuals of curriculum and commands to be given, not manuals telling you how to fence. But no, that is distinctly true. Is you could use that as a displacement. Cool. So next drill we're going to look at, so we kind of got out of sequence. It's all made sense in my head till someone decided to, be helpful. Next drill you see is the parries, of which there are also 4. So there is what is termed parry 1, which is basically high prime. Just lift my hand up so that my sword hand is in line with my offside shoulder, and I'm now protecting my inside, or even moreover, it can be above the head, so I've pretty much covered myself. There is parry 2, which is tierce. And what I do for that is to whip my elbow back to really aggressively retract it, which I guess would go with your beat theory that a lot of the, a big part of the system is beating your opponent's sort of side.
So you don't want to do the big oval movement.
That's something that both the 1875 infantry sword exercise and also the 1859 naval small arms instruction both say is important. Is that don't think of this as pulling the arm back. Don't think about the sword. Think about the arm and what you do with it. And make sure the soldiers know that.
Because otherwise you wouldn't like it.
Yeah, exactly. And then yes, you have parry 3, which is low prime, entry guard, parry 4, second. And basically the drill is literally you sit in the guard and they call out the names and you just move to them and then back to guard in sequence. And that's how you practice them. And then the third and final solo drill, and in a lot of particularly manuals aimed at civilians that are documenting this, this is as far as we actually get in terms of drills. They're just like, all right, here are the 3 drills that teach you all of the techniques. Whereas the military manuals sometimes have partner drills that you do with this as well, although there's a lot more variation in those. The last one is thrusting drill. So we come on guard, tip goes forward, thrust, which is done on the lunge, back to guard. And from here, you go high prime, tip goes forward, thrust, back to guard. And here, parry, tip goes forward, thrust, back to guard, parry, tip goes forward, thrust, back to guard, parry, tip goes forward, thrust, and back to guard. And this one is drilled quite significantly. Even there are some variants in the manual that do that drill as a partner drill. So my partner will come on guard. I will stab them or step at them back. They will throw cut 1. I parry, stab them, come back to guard. They will throw cut 2. I parry, stab them, come back to guard. They'll do, well, I'm just going to stop using the numbers because it's going to get confusing between this and the Angelo school numbers that everyone else in the period uses.
Couldn't trust me not to throw one of these at you.
Actually, if you did throw like a rising,
It's still working.
yeah, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, if you throw like a horizontal cut to my belly, parry, come on guard, thrust, and if you throw horizontal to the other side, parry, tip on line, thrust, come back to guard. And this drill is considered very important because all of those thrusts are very, very covered and controlled. I have a lot of control of my opponent's weapon. The other thing they say is that, some manuals say is that the thrust is often faster and better in enclosed spaces than than the cut can be. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of the system. The other thing you see in some but not all manuals is partner drills. So we'll do things like come on guard, one person will throw each cut, and we'll go back to guard between them, and then you throw each cut, and we'll just go through in sequence and take turns. I think I did the wrong cut. Also, we've started doing more kind of weight style, Musgrave weight style, ornate cuts rather than big prime.
Yeah, that's
type
true.
of things. Yeah, we don't. This is not a system we really train because up until it's most of the sources that we have, basically most of the sources that are common within the HEMA community say that this system is not very good. And I think that's partially why no one actually knows about it in the HEMA community. And I'm going to quickly keep talking but move up because we've got a spam bot that needs to be destroyed.
With fire.
And yeah, if you have any non-spam comments, please put them down. Like if you have anything you want to say. Yeah, this was meant to be more discussion-y, but I didn't have time to buy a Zoom license, and Restream that is not great for discussion, which is also partially why we have taken. But yeah, it's a lot of sources we have are basically criticizing this method, mostly for its simplicity, but occasionally for, like in the case of Hutton, he does have some criticisms about the guard. Not so much the cuts, which surprised me because to me, though, that was intuitively the biggest problem, unless you have someone to tell you to beat, which I think is might actually be a better explanation of Allanson-Winn's criticism that you're not going to cut properly unless you have a fencing instructor there to tell you how to do it, which makes a lot more sense. Does make a lot more sense given that the last thing I'd accuse of systems basically teaching big kind of tree felling blows of is not teaching someone how to effectively deliver damage to an opponent.
Well, it sounds very like the system is very much expecting you to parry first anyway. So I maybe wonder if it's just assumed that you would know not to do that after you've parried. A bit like you can judge how dangerous it would be to pull your hand back right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff where it's very, very obvious from the context of some of the manuals that this is not literal fighting. I think a big mistake that a lot of people make when criticizing a system is they're like, oh, well, these drills don't literally translate into fighting, but one of the things I hear from a lot of combat sports coaches is drilling is not sparring and sparring is not fighting. Like, what you do in one gives you the skills to do the same type of thing in the other, but they're not necessarily simulations. I mean, sparring is kind of a simulation of fighting, but there's still abstracts and differences. So yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one, and I suspect also this might also explain a lot of the criticism. You basically need someone there to tell you how to use it properly. Which, if you've got because this system was adopted pretty widely throughout the military. Like, this was This is the closest the Victorian, like the high Victorian British military had. Both the Army and the Navy had to a standard system in the period. Although the officers ended up learning an Italian system by Mansolino, his system was favoured by the British officer who was put in charge of writing the manual. The British had committees to try and work out what was best, but the committees couldn't agree and would all end up fighting with each other and have to be disbanded. So eventually what the British just did is they put one person in charge to make all decisions, which is also how we end up with the 1908 cavalry sabre. It was a very weird weapon even by the standards of the time, but it was one person's idea, and that person was basically given the power of God to come up with the weapon. And so he did. And debates about its utility rage on to this day. Actually, most debates in period have just reoccurred with him, and he really very successfully recreated the same arguments that were happening back in the day, including about whether or not this system was any good, which is why we're doing this. But yeah, I guess I don't know. I feel a bit more. I was going to dunk on it a little bit until I was like, oh, but it's good for this thing, and then you pointed out the big thing, and I'm like, actually, that's not so bad.
Especially if you're trying to tie together a sabre system with an anti-bayonet system. Big exaggerated defenses make sense to me.
Yeah, a bit something so.
Whereas, sabre fencing one-on-one in the Sal, smaller movements are probably better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that I get the sense from the period as well that this system was not very popular amongst civilian fencers because it wasn't very good in the cell, but that's not necessarily what it's for. Although my assumption at the point where I'm like, hang on, maybe this isn't so bad. Bias on the table, I started 19th century fencing with a manual that was a reaction against this system that doesn't like it. And I didn't, it was a good, many years before I actually encountered it. Like there's many years where I didn't actually know what system Hutton was complaining about, just he was complaining about the standard military system. There was a period where I actually thought it was the older Angela the Younger system until I actually traced the lineage of that system and be like, oh no, that's the system that Hutton likes and is wanting to bring back. Hutton is very much, sort of the last kind of hero of the Angelo school in a weird way. I think the first way of making sense of it was as an anti-bayonet system, like assuming that if you're going to fight someone, you're probably going to be facing a bayonet. That's why I've got a big bookie stick. But if you might come on guard at the distance that this thing expects to engage at, which thankfully is not much wider than the distance of this, what is the biggest room in my apartment.
You lean back.
Yeah.
You can kind of stick the back end down the corridor.
I know. I think I'll be okay. I just have to might have to wash some marks off the wall. But if we come on guard, Jacob in engaging guard now has a huge advantage against the bayonet in that any attack I make is going to come in one place. I'm going to come forward, and Jacob can parry. And worse still is I don't actually have to do anything for Jacob's parry to be effective, to do the same thing he wants. Jacob can parry, grab, withdraw, or generally you pull back, and that's the other thing that kind of makes sense in the system. Like pull back to your shoulder? Yeah, because if you attack from there, there's not a lot I can do. Most of what I've got, most of my options are just to try and recover the weapon.
Yeah.
Which still gives you a big opening. Whereas, if you keep your sword there and you grab, me struggling and fighting can tangle your weapon up.
Yeah.
And that's the thing you see in a lot of medieval systems where they have grapples. They grab their opponent, grab their weapon, and they pull back their sword to get it clear and get it in so it's unimpeded. Conversely, if Jacob comes back on guard and I'm threatening here, exact same deal. Yeah, just do that. And I don't actually have to do anything for that to be a useful thing to do. You basically, there's literally advice where in the 1875 infantry sword exercise where they say, against the bayonet, you're going to parry. Your opponent might not have attacked, but the parry is still a good thing to do anyway. They phrase it very differently, but that's like I'm paraphrasing. But that's the sentiment is basically you just aggressive against a bayonet or a pike. They specifically say that you might face a pike. You parry aggressively.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In the manual, do we see what the left hand is doing and if it's doing something different against sabre versus bayonet? Just because I noticed from single sword fighting, I tend to tuck mine way out of the way. But if I'm going to want to grab a bayonet, it's probably a bit more available.
It is always punched on the hip.
Teapot. Okay.
Yep. Yes. Well, it is not. It's a British system. Of course, you're going to be a teapot. Both short and stout. Here's my handle. Here is imperialism. So yeah. And the other thing that might happen is the bayoneteer might pull their bayonet back, but you can just follow them in. Like doing that to try and change where they're going to attack. Mm-hmm. If you react in time, you get an opening. If you don't react in time, if they do it too quick, all I've done is made it really, really obvious I'm going to attack on the other side. So there's not really a good option. This is kind of a thing at really close range, or like if you're facing a bayonet and you've got a cutlass or a sabre, that's a really, really good guard. The cuts make a lot more sense, especially actually with the expulsions that you mentioned. Although the one manual that does talk about how to deal with a pike or a bayonet does actually say to grab. And yeah, you've got it makes sense.
I guess one situation it might not make sense is if they're holding the bayonet, but this wouldn't work so much with the bayonet, the pike, holding it quite retracted and ready to launch.
Yeah.
Because then you have less knowledge of which side it'll be on.
Yeah. I mean, you can deal with that if I'm in a short arms position. You can deal with that by basically just moving forward aggressively and going, well, if the tip is high, it's probably going to be a high engagement anyway. Like my tip.
So kind of move in with that kind of cover.
Yeah, or move in, and then go. Like you can basically go, in the same way that with a sword attack, you'd say, right, I'm going to cover against the most likely attack. If my opponent has a maiden attack, I'll just cover against the most likely attacks they come in. But yeah, you can do the same thing. There. What bayonet manuals do say to deal with someone with a sword, they actually say to start down here. So I can show that from the front. Rather than being on guard, start low. And I think what you mean, they don't. This is the anti-sword guard basically. And I suspect what that means for the bayoneteer is you can beat, which the weight of the bayonet has a huge advantage on, or I can switch sides very quickly. So it does recover a bit of advantage.
Yeah, because the swordsman wants to control your stick. So just get it out of the fight until you need it. Makes sense to me, especially when you have more leverage.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense. And I love the kind of the interplay between sword and bayonet as the matter of the whole thing. So we've got some comments which I can see but can't read. And I've got some spam, so I'm just gonna block that. So Philip, like my comment, here's my handle, here's my handle. I got interested in 19th century Britain at university when most of the history was about the empire, and not in like the sort of romanticized favourable way that you see it in pop culture. So yeah, I make very cynical comments. But yeah, well, there are probably less gentle things I could have said, but yeah. So Bill's got a comment. Bill said, movement of 2 to 4 inches can deflect a longer weapon up
4
to
to 5.
4 to 5 can deflect a longer weapon up to 3 or 4 feet in the attack line. That is. Yep. So just to show everyone what Bill's talking about. So to deflect me completely out of the way, Jacob only needs to make a very small push. So yeah, I mean that's you've moved me what, like 5-6 centimeters,
Yeah.
if that. Now, if you start walking forward, you know, my tip just goes flying past. And I don't know if we can show this from the front. This is a very difficult thing to see from the side, but
It's invisible down here.
invisible Jacob. So if invisible Jacob moves, now if you start, I don't know how you're going to come. You can, yeah, I think that's about as good as we can do. But you can see how much it moves, and that's yeah, the same, basically the same idea with this. I think, just, and particularly with the thrusts, is a big part of that always thrusting with your hand in tiers. Is as long as you learn the parry drill properly, you can always scoop the weapon up and just drive in. And it's really interesting. A lot of this system works best when you're aggressive. Like, I don't think it's a defensive system. I actually don't think. I don't think this system would work. Like, it'd work okay defensively because swords, as a weapon, are decently defensive. That's kind of why they're popular as a melee weapon, is that a sword can attack and defend much better than a lot of other weapons. And you know, go back to like the Viking Age, where like there's axes and spears and stuff around. An axe is a devastating attacking weapon, but you need a shield with it to defend yourself, otherwise you're reliant on distance, which is nowhere near safe. Whereas a sword, you can, with single sword fighting, fencing is a thing, and has been the norm for probably about 400 years. The base, and then for maybe probably about 300 years of 300 years of Europe's history, it's been basically the default. Like, it's been very rare that Europeans have used offhand weapons. So swords are good defensively. But actually, it's just like a lot of the stuff, like the thrust from guard, just as there's a Jacob, I'm an attack. That's a very, very good aggressive movement, but it only works well if I'm very dedicated to launch myself into the attack. And one of the things actually the British did a lot of in this period is they did aggression training, aggression course, like they go through and stab bags or sandbags and things like that. You still see that today actually in bayonet training. Well, bayonet training is just running through an obstacle stabbing stuff. And that was that was the bayonet training most soldiers got. That was all they got, was just aggression training. And I think it's kind of the same with this, is it works best if you are aggressive. If I am thinking aggression and forward, I'm probably going to abbreviate this movement, or at the very least, start it as soon as I can, which gives me the edge. And then the fact that everything is centered, and here, if you want to riposte, I just come to a guard, get rid of the beat, whatever, and then just come straight back at you. That also explains why the thrust drill is continuous, and why a lot of stuff is continuous. It's kind of just, do simple movements aggressively kind of system, which still not sure what would work great in the fencing room, and I still think is probably much better suited to be an anti-bayonet system than an anti-sword system or sword system. But it's good. It's it's not without its flaws. I don't think it's as bad as some of its critics seem to think. I think also there's probably an element that people in fencing cells just want more than just more like a dozen techniques to use in the fencing game. But
I can definitely see it being effective with bayonet, especially because I noticed when I was thinking of ways that you would want to use a bayonet against it, I was thinking of retracting and stop thrusting. I was essentially thinking what you might do with a sword. I was trying to use the bayonet like a sword. So I was like, I just don't want to engage with that. I don't want to play parry riposte with it. I'm just going to smack your forearm to prevent you from doing those big movements.
Yeah.
I was essentially trying to do the same thing with the bayonet, like just keep it out of the fight,
Yeah, pull it back, which
just try to make you overcommit to something.
yeah, but an aggressive opponent is just going to come in, is going to overcome that. The other thing actually, because one thing's about bayonets, these are decent at parrying. Like if you from the guard, you just take a swing, like I can parry quite. I can put up a big parry, but doing this means I've now got to come back on guard and attack. So bayonets tend to be better at at attacking. They're very much an aggressive weapon. Which I think is also probably where the aggression doctrine of bayonet comes from. Is in bayonet or bayonet fencing, the aggressor tends to have the advantage compared to sword fighting, where the defender is considered to have the advantage.
Well, especially as you were saying last week, that butt fighting is not really much of a thing. Because you could be a lot more defensive if you're parrying and then leave the butt around.
Yeah.
But if it's a thrusting thing, yeah. You want to get back in center.
Oh yeah. Although, I know butt fight in bayonet today, butt fencing is a lot more common. Because amongst the people I've seen doing bayonet, they all seem to have done a lot of like quarterstaff or held like poleaxe or stuff like that, where butt fencing is a big part of the system. So I think it's more of a transfer thing. But if I am in extension distance of you with my bayonet, like the happy tin can poke you really quickly unless you've got a really strong engagement or opposition. I'm way out of like butt distance.
Oh yeah, it wouldn't be an opening, it'd be a defensive. Like after you parried, then because your tip's offline, because you just parried, then it's easy to bring the butt around.
Yeah, from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have to come to.
You'd still have to step forward, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, to the technique. I'm getting a shorter stick. I'm getting a shorter stick.
Just like one bottle.
I'll get a proper stick. This is fine. Yeah. From here. The technique you're meant to do from here is that, but that's still, compared to the reach of your sword, even if I'm very generous about like how long the stock of my stick pretend rifle is, to reach you, I still have a huge reach disadvantage compared to the sword. The worst part of this is if you try and grab by just firing your grappling hand at my right armpit, like the armpit, it's very, very easy for you to intersect bayonet or arm or whatever, regardless of what I'm doing. And if you can like really push my shoulder, it's very hard for me to get any power in that shot. This is the thing, like with this kind of system, if I've got a bayonet, you come on guard, as soon as you get contact, like as soon as you parry, as soon as I do a thing, you step forward and grab on the way in, like it's actually quite difficult for me to butt fence because, because anything I do is going to intersect with your grappling hand, and anytime your grappling hand gets on my, like any part of my weapon, any part of my arm, of my right arm, or my back arm, not so much my lead arm, you can basically choke up and cause problems with my butt. I knew when butt fencing came up, this was going to descend into silliness, into
we play with swords because we are children, yes.
I'll play with them as an adult, thank you. Bill said, this is in regard to moving the thing offline. High guard would explain it better. Yeah, I think it's true of all guards, really. Is just if you've not a small movement of the tip, as a principle, small movement of the tip will cause a big movement if you move in. So hook the butt end over the sword arm and drag it down behind. Alternatively, hook the bayonet butt end over the parrying arm of the sword and drag it down behind to off balance. Yeah, so what I think Bill means. Again, just have to pretend this is longer. So you get or you get contact, even just start from guard, you get like contact, you parry, stop me doing this, you're coming in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Like this stuff I can do.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I'll be off balance, but I'll have a sword that's not
yeah,
having anything done to it.
contending with both the sword and the grapple is very hard. And the point I guess I was more getting at is that all of this, butt striking kind of stuff, because there's something grabbable always in sort of this space here, can all be stopped by one movement. So it doesn't really matter what butt thing I'm throwing at you. You're going to grab it, and yes, once you grab it, there are reactions, but it's not like tip off line, butt stroke the way it would be for a weapon this length. If I was using like a modern assault rifle, yeah, these are equal length weapons. With a period bayonet, this weapon, the pointy end has a lot more reach than the dashy end. To the point where I have to move forward, because even when I move forward to not hit my wall, I'm still on the reach of Jacob.
And there's also the point that by the time I've parried, moved in, and done this, neither of us have an advantage with our weapon. Like we might as well wrestling over the same weapon.
I don't know. Like here's the thing: if you pull your sword back as soon as you get contact with the hand.
Yeah, well, we had it before when we were twisting over.
Yeah,
like if you don't have control of this, then
like that's coming back at me. Yeah, and especially if it's at your shoulder. Like at this point, you probably could let go and just come straight back. Like it's one of those things that
it's that there is a simple movement I can do, a parry and reaching out, that makes any advantage of the stick gone.
Yeah.
And yes, he could be a better grappler, but
yeah. I mean, I guess the better reaction is sort of, if you grab.
Okay.
The better reaction would be to actually cover on the sword side so I can come into grapple.
Yeah, still it comes back to my shoulder.
Yeah, it's still high risk.
Still leg, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things, which I guess goes back to the aggression thing, is I basically have to rely on stepping in and knowing this is going to become a wrestling match.
Yeah, I feel like that's your best option. Is just absolutely do whatever you can to keep control of this hand and wrestle.
Yeah. You probably even be, once you've got you'd probably be better off doing just putting the stick out there to make, to force you to grab it so they can react by getting it to here and then coming in.
What do you mean?
So when you've got contact, you're coming in, I put the stick out, I immediately move it to here to try and smother or cover your sword.
And then if you're rushing in, maybe I won't be able to get you.
Yeah, and then I can come in and that's where the grappling starts. But I have to, I'm mostly using the butt to set up the grapple.
Yeah, it's like a standing shield for one side of your body while you rush in.
Yeah. Yeah. And
there's a sport for you.
Pardon?
Wrestling with shields.
They had that in the Middle Ages. There is the ritual dueling shield, which has big hooky things on it. It's based on
But they had swords usually, didn't they?
There are some depictions of swords or clubs being used with it, and there are some depictions of it being used by itself. And in both cases, it ends up being wrestling. So I've got some further comments. Thankfully, not from spam bots, although I expect to be deleting a lot of things. Moving a flying circle into the rear of him. The Bayonet, you would. Yeah, Bill said, from my observation. So short stick and short stumps. Yeah, the short stick would work a lot better. I mean, I don't have to worry about the stick hitting the floor. I don't have, and it's a lot easier to maneuver as well.
Harder for me to grab as well.
Yeah. Short stick has a lot of advantages in close. There was an old reenactor solution to this problem. I can find the I was so prepared for tonight. I'm like, I'll put out anything we vaguely might need. But if we get a knife, right? What a lot of metal weapons reenactors who fought with chain would do is they would hold a knife down at the bottom of the spear shaft, so that when that the grapple happened, just bang, then stop, and that that works, but that wasn't something that was done in period. That's something that was done by late 20th century metal weapons reactors. In some cases, very stiff daggers that would probably really hurt if you hit someone with an knee, forcing if they are blind.
That's the point. we want to discourage them from grappling with us, so we hurt them.
I think it's more just a reflection of how difficult it is to make proper, safe metal daggers.
Yeah.
But no, I think most metal weapons reactors are actually quite careful. By virtue of necessity, but that's the best solution to this problem of someone comes in, because once the sword person gets past your tip or gets control of your tip, it's very hard. It's very, very hard to regain advantage. It's your best bet is to try and turn the fight into a wrestling match as quickly as possible. Which, I think it's true of a lot of weapons actually. I mean, we can't show you in here because literally wall behind me, but in more open spaces, it's a very, very even fight between the spear and the sword. Once the swords person knows these kinds of tactics, because it becomes all about making the bayoneteer wants to keep the swords person at reach, the swords person wants to close. And if the swords person backs up at all, the bayoneteer wins. If the swords person gets close to the bayoneteer, the swords person wins. And that's pretty much how it rolls. Which is also in places where I've seen people insist that the bayonet has just such a huge, insane advantage that a sword was just there as kind of false hope almost. Or there's some theories that because you can't stand in fence, sword versus bayonet can't stand in fence. Alternatively, some people theorize that the balance is redressed if the swords person is charging. There's a lot of people who do Highland broadsword who think that the sword only really works on charge. A lot of what I see with those clubs is that because the tip, a bayonet tip is moving about, and people are a bit unfamiliar with it, they instinctively back up to get more space to judge it better. And that's what gives the bayoneteer the opening. The bayonet has a huge advantage over the sword if the swords person backs up, if they instinctively back up. If the bayonet, but if they don't, if they are aggressive and keep a lot of forward pressure, it's at least an even fight, if not a fight that favours the swords person.
That's why I think a big movement system like this one tends to work much better against bayonet. Because rather than trying to judge what they're doing and do the correct parry, it's more like everything in front of me is getting out of the way so I can come in.
Yeah.
Just collecting space.
I do wonder as well how that would go with people at lower skill levels. Like if you taught the big movement, just whack thing out of the way, come in, to people who you could do maybe 3 or 4 sessions of training with, if that, over one training session, how they would go against people who learned a more conventional, who learned sorts of things that would be done in fencing rooms, so sort of primarily Angelo-derived stuff, derived from the 1817 infantry sword exercise, which is basically the standard template for sabre through most of the 19th century Britain, and which also appears in the US a bit. I was going to say, it appears in Australia and Canada, but they were both British colonies at the time, so throughout the British Empire, basically. I wonder how someone trained in each would go after one session. like one session where people just show big movements, be aggressive versus, here's a variety of techniques that you can use for a very versatile game.
After one lesson, they may do well because the things you teach a standard fencer in one lesson are not necessarily the things that really help you against someone doing those big movements.
Mm.
But I think once you learn like a disengage and a stop thrust, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is,
I think by lesson 5,
yeah,
the advantage.
the more lessons go on, the more the more lessons you get, the more fencing room systems have advantage, which is probably, I guess goes back to the claim of this is overly simplistic. Like there's a lot of things. I suspect that this is a lot of stuff where you'd have to relearn if you really got into fencing. You have to relearn a lot of stuff, and that was actually
I can see it working in someone who's just started and just learned very narrow parries and safe cuts, just kind of throwing them out of the way.
Yeah, that's actually a thing as well with Primo Green. If anyone remembers back to the cutlass and pistol lesson, Primo Green has an even more simple system that has similar-ish ideas of just parry, 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 cut. Very simple, but what Primo Green says is like you get a bunch of sailors, you just give them single sticks. Masks weren't in common use in this period. People just, it was the way you defended your face was by leaning on the stick as it hit you. Bit vicious. But yeah, his advice is that if you give sailors single sticks and encourage them to fence while they're at sea not doing anything, like as just a cue for boredom kind of thing, they will pick stuff up on their own, and there's probably a whole lot of communal learning where like the one person was really into stick fighting or was into fencing, single sticking, cudgeling, whatever, before they jumped on the ship, we'll start showing everyone else stuff, and then people will start working things out because they will get competitive and want to beat each other. They'll just kind of learn it organically through bouting. So you're really only just getting them started, so they've got something in case, you've got some technique to use before they can actually get good through bouting, which may be the case. And one of the reasons this system propagated was because it started in the Navy, and the Navy was regarded as being better fencers, better swordspeople than the Army. And the basic reason is just because the Navy did more bouting, more training, because single stick is fun, and fencing in this period primarily, but it is. No, I'm going to say this here. I know there's a lot of people who don't like it when I say this, but I'm going to say it and they can, come and fight me on Saturday or something if they don't like it. There'll be a post, or check the event details. Fencing was primarily leisure and recreational. Like it was something people were doing primarily, like most fencing would be done for fun. Right, so do we have any closing out comments, questions, other things anyone wants to know while we're on this topic? Because I don't know. I mean, I know there's a tendency when you're like, hey, I'm evaluating something, let's give a final verdict. But if you're watching this, you can make up your own minds. I don't know. If you think I'm wrong, say so in the comments. If you think I'm right, say so in the comments. If you're not sure, I know, get some buffers, get some cutlasses, sabres, masks, and protective gear, especially if you've got metal weapons. Go out, give it a go. See how it works. And other than that, this moves us to the end of the night, assuming no one has any comments. So this is the point where I kind of distract you with sword facts for a little bit, or to give everyone a chance to madly type. But yeah, if you Bill Anderson wants to know what system is being used for sabre. This system. So the same system that we've been doing tonight. It was adopted in 1858 by the Navy, primarily but not exclusively for cutlass. And then throughout the 1860s, it was adopted by the Army in various manuals and became, by certainly the 1870s, had become the standard single sword infantry, dismounted fencing system of the British military. Interestingly enough, the one place that the older Angelo system persisted was actually in the police force. The first manual of drill and sword practice for constables. I might get the name wrong, but which was published in 1868. You still use the old Angelo system. So I might just quickly run through that, mostly because I expect this to last a little longer than it normally does. All of them, it actually has. We got through stuff really quickly.
It's a simple system.
Oh God.
Yeah. So back to my previous comment that in the HEMA community, there is a kind of frustrating ignorance of what is the standard system in the 19th century. When I talk about Angelo, I'm talking about Angelo the Younger. So the Angelo that most HEMA people are familiar with is from Angelo the Elder, who is, which is the same system that is done by Roworth and Taylor, Roworth and Taylor, whoever wrote that manual. Someone please explain to me which one, how that works, because it's always confusing. But that system that you see there, and you also see in all the various kind of Highland and Hungarian broadsword military posters, that's Angelo the Older. When people talk in the 19th century, when 19th century sources talk about Angelo and the Angelo school, they're talking about Angelo the Younger, who, which is the older Angelo's son. And he developed a system that is similar to what was done in civilian fencing schools, or was the template for what was done in civilian fencing schools. It has 3 guards, outside, inside, and hanging. The hanging is really bent over. This is not me just having bad posture. This is how it was done. And people complain about it mostly. There is the 7 cuts that if you are familiar with familiar with the other set of stuff I do, cut 1, cut 2, cut 3, cut 4, cut 5, cut 6, and cut 7. Interestingly enough, you learn the cuts before you learn any of the guards or anything else. It also it has the same footwork. It has the same footwork drill that we saw in the later Toohey system. First position, second position, third position, second, first, just randomly. It has that. That is the same. It has that drill. It has the cut drill. Parry. It has 7 parries. 4 to 7 cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then it has a bunch of partner drills and also, particularly from the mid 19th century onwards, rules for sparring. But those kind of vary from manual to manual. They're much less consistent. And also don't appear in every manual that depicts this system. Hutton's early manuals depict this system, except Hutton basically gets rid of the inside guard and the hanging guard, because they're in favour of just a tierce guard, or in one manual that you can only get in printed form and you can only get in Britain. So this is the one I haven't read, but I've been told basically it's the same as all of the other manuals that Hutton was writing up until Hero Cold Steel, except that it starts from the engaging guard, which Hutton later criticised. So I get the impression Hutton used until a point where he found it didn't work for him. You see that is the standard system in the early part of the 19th century, and it's the standard civilian system right up until really World War I. You still see manuals describing it as in the early 20th century, whereas Toohey's system is only really in the military, and is explicitly and when you see civilian manuals describe it, they're explicitly saying this is what is taught in the military. they seem to actually differentiate that from like a civilian system, or like from from what was being done in civilian fencing cells. One thing you do see a lot of with the earlier Angelo system though is they change the guards. I mean, so they keep the outside guard, which gets called, or it starts getting called the tiers guard as time goes on because they adopt French numbering, French foil numbering, and the engaging guard that you see in Toohey actually starts to be adopted in, from about the 1860s onwards. You start to see it. In fact, this is the one element of the military system, of Toohey's system, that actually makes it into civilian fencing schools. So yeah, that was kind of my little rant. I had this idea that I was going to prepare this a lot better, and then I didn't. But I did want to give like a technical history of British military sabre and British 19th century sabre. Again, do not like the term British military sabre as a descriptor because it's inaccurate. And yeah, I do actually suspect it's designed to differentiate, trying to differentiate 19th century British sabre, or like 19th century sabre and Hema sabre from Olympic sabre. Anyway, cool. So unless anyone has any other questions or comments, we'll finish up shortly. We're not meeting via Zoom tonight. But if you do want to socialise, if you do want to hang out in Zoom, we are going to be meeting up on Saturday to do some actual in-person fencing. I'll post details of that to the Facebook event. And if you're watching here on YouTube, you can find the details for that meetup on our website, which will be in the event description or the video description. Or just if you're watching this in like after the next 4 days, 3-4 days. Right, when's that day?
Kind of sad.
All right. Well, yeah, we're both temporally impeded, I guess. We'll just check out the website. There will be other physical fencing, especially next year when we go back to physical classes. Speaking of physical classes, we still do have to cover the costs of hall hire and insurance. So if you did enjoy this and you can make a donation, please click on the PayPal link and make a donation. If you're wary of clicking on anything in the comments, go to the video description in YouTube or the Facebook or the event description on Facebook and you find the link there. I know there have been spam bots all night. They are the bane of my existence, and yeah, I hate them. But yeah, otherwise, donations appreciated. See you Saturday, and next week come back because we're going to be doing more sabre, but we're going to be learning how to fight dirty with sabre. So how to use sabre with scabbard and kicks and all that, and that's going to take us right up to
Pocket sand.
No pocket sand. I do want to check the range of pocket sand, but that's another video. Anyway, and also thank you, Jacob, for all your help. Yes.
Thank you for being.